I am deeply aware of this great inheritance and of the duties and heavy responsibilities of sovereignty.
Lady Louise Windsor, the quiet, low-profile daughter of Prince Edward and Sophie, has suddenly become the center of intense media attention after the king revealed the existence of a letter believed to have been written by the late Queen Elizabeth II shortly before her death. Royal watchers are buzzing with claims that in the letter, Elizabeth II expressed absolute trust in Louise and her wish for the young royal to become Catherine's closest confidant and key supporter in the years ahead. Many interpret this as the clearest signal yet that the William and Catherine generation is being quietly positioned to assume full control within the House of Windsor. While Catherine is said to be quietly backing Louise behind the scenes, the strongest backlash has come from Queen Camilla. Sources close to the palace say Camilla confronted King Charles directly in a fit of anger upon learning the letter's contents. The closed-door row has been described as suffocatingly tense, with Camilla reportedly realizing her own position could be sidelined to make way for the younger generation. Nevertheless, King Charles is said to be standing firm, placing the late Queen's final wishes above all else. Is Lady Louise truly being secretly groomed for an unprecedented powerful role alongside Catherine? And how will Camilla respond as she watches her influence within the royal family steadily slip away? Beneath the ancient dome of Buckingham Palace, where secrets were usually buried deep behind thick velvet curtains, King Charles III sat at a time-worn mahogany desk. 2 years into a turbulent reign that began after the late Queen's funeral, in September 2022, he still sought guidance from the past. Before him lay a slightly yellowed envelope of vellum paper sealed with the late Queen Elizabeth II's red wax stamp, a long-delayed spiritual testament. The central figure of that letter was not one of the brightest names on the front pages, but Lady Louise Windsor. The eldest daughter of Prince Edward and Sophie, Duchess of Edinburgh, Louise had long been cherished by the public for her classic beauty and absolute discretion. Born in 2003, the young woman had always remained on the edge of royal scandals, yet in the heart of her late grandmother, she was a precious gem that needed polishing. To the late Queen Louise was more than just a granddaughter. She embodied the calm and unwavering loyalty that would be essential to protect the House of Windsor amid the fierce winds of a new era. King Charles III slowly slid a silver letter opener along the edge of the envelope. His hands, marked by the liver spots of age, trembled slightly as they traced the neat, elegant handwriting of his mother. The letter's contents struck like a bucket of cold water against the current order Camilla had been trying so hard to maintain. The late Queen expressed a powerful desire for Lady Louise Windsor to be given a more official role, not merely as a spare, but as the closest confidant and loyal guardian to the Princess of Wales. As a monarch striving to streamline the royal institution, Charles understood that this decision would mark a turning point. He glanced toward the window where the silhouette of Queen Camilla could be seen on the balcony. For Camilla, elevating a young royal like Louise was not just a personnel change. It was a brutal sign that the generational handover was being accelerated. When the king convened a small closed-door meeting to announce this final wish, the atmosphere in the room grew thick and heavy. Charles read the letter aloud in a somber yet resolute voice. He emphasized that Louise would begin appearing more frequently beside Catherine, learning how to manage charitable organizations and preparing for a future in which Catherine would become queen. The late Queen's trust in Louise served as an unassailable royal command. No one could openly oppose it, yet it planted the seeds of deep unease. Camilla's eyes at that moment were a portrait of inner turmoil. Her gaze narrowed, her thin lips pressed into a tight line when she heard the phrase, "closest support for Catherine." The presence of Louise, a young, pure, and thoroughly legitimate Windsor, felt like a reminder that Camilla's own era was merely a brief transitional chapter. her emotions shifted from shock to quiet fury. She looked across at Catherine, who sat opposite her with a calm expression, her eyes showing both emotion and readiness to shoulder the new responsibility. The harmony between Catherine and the late Queen's wishes felt like a knife to Camilla's pride. She felt excluded from a major secret, a long-term plan that her own husband was now carrying out with utmost devotion. Camilla understood that once the younger generation held absolute power, supported by loyal figures like Louise, her own influence over internal decisions would vanish like morning mist over the River Thames. When the meeting ended, a heavy silence fell over the room, so profound that the ticking of the antique wall clock could be heard clearly. Camilla did not wait for the usual polite farewells. She rose, her silk dress rustling across the polished wooden floor. Her movement was so decisive that those around her flinched. Without glancing at the king or offering even a courteous nod to Catherine, Camilla walked silently out of the room. Her shoulders were tense beneath her elegant coat, her hand gripping her small handbag as if she wanted to crush it. As she strode down the long palace corridor, her face betrayed uncontrollable rage, the fury of a powerful woman, realizing she was steadily losing her place in the very house she had fought her entire life to enter. Camilla could no longer maintain the composure she usually displayed in public. She paced rapidly in the confined space, her heels striking the floor with sharp, relentless clicks that echoed the turmoil raging inside her chest. King Charles III leaned against his desk, his gaze fixed on his tightly interlaced fingers. He knew this storm could not be avoided. When Camilla turned to face him, her expression had lost all trace of the gentleness she usually showed beside her husband. Instead, her features sharpened with the bitterness of someone who felt betrayed. To Camilla, the late Queen's letter was not a sacred final wish, but a direct assault on the position she had spent decades building. The Queen's anger stemmed from a deep-seated fear, the fear of being forgotten. She looked at the man who had weathered so many storms with her, only to realize he was now laying the first stones of a new reign in which she would have no central place. Charles's firm determination to advance Lady Louise's role and strengthen William and Catherine's power felt like a silent declaration that the monarchy was rushing toward the future, leaving her behind as a relic of the past. Camilla stepped closer, her eyes blazing with a piercing glare. She said nothing, yet every gesture, the tilt of her chin, the slight tremor in her shoulders, radiated fierce defiance. She felt pushed out of the center of power, reduced to a supporting character in a drama where she should have been the leading lady beside the king. In her mind, granting Louise such influence was not merely favoritism toward a granddaughter, but a strategic move to militarize Catherine's presence, turning the public's darling daughter-in-law into an unshakable force. The peak of her fury erupted when Camilla realized Charles's silence was itself an admission. That silence stood like a wall between them, one that not even their long-shared love could breach. In a moment of lost control, the pride of a woman who had endured decades of judgment drove her to an extreme gesture. She placed her hand on her wedding ring, a symbolic and threatening move. The thought of divorce, which would trigger an unprecedented constitutional crisis and destroy the reputation Charles had painstakingly built, flashed in her defiant gaze like a final ace in this game of power. Yet King Charles III was no longer the man who once yielded to emotional pressure. He lifted his head, his eyes unflinching. His calm in that moment was the most terrifying of all. He did not respond with anger, but with the cold resolve of a sovereign. Charles understood that to protect the survival of the House of Windsor, he had to place the interests of the crown above his wife's personal demands. He moved slowly, not to comfort Camilla, but to reclaim his regal space. The king's decision was carried out through decisive actions. He gathered the documents related to the Queen's upcoming schedule, a silent signal that her activities would be significantly curtailed. His rejection of Camilla's demands was not mere refusal, but a form of punishment. He had chosen the younger generation and long-term stability over temporary peace in the bedroom. Camilla froze her hands, falling limply to her sides. The bitter truth seeped into every fiber of her being. She could not stop the wheel of history from turning. A hollow feeling engulfed her as she realized her influence over Charles had reached its limit. She was no longer his sole advisor, no longer the top priority when the crown itself was under threat. Camilla understood that from this moment onward, she would have to live in a new reality, one where the power of the queen was merely a fading shadow before the brilliant light of the coming generation. In the quiet sanctuary of her private study, Princess Catherine carefully reviewed the stacks of charity project files. Beside her sat Lady Louise Windsor, upright and attentive, her clear blue eyes following every movement of her cousin. Their relationship had now moved far beyond polite afternoon teas, evolving into a deep bond forged by shared ideals and responsibility. Catherine observed Louise with quiet admiration. She saw in the young woman a rare composure, a poise that reminded her of the late Queen Elizabeth II's steadfastness. The way Louise turned each page, the neat notes she made, and the thoughtful furrow of her brow when facing a complex issue, all revealed a maturity well beyond her early 20s. Catherine saw in Louise not just a younger relative, but a strategic ally, someone who could help her bear the weight of the crown in the years to come. Their joint public engagements were becoming increasingly frequent. At youth-focused events, Catherine skillfully created space for Louise to step into the spotlight. She did not thrust her forward abruptly, but guided her like a devoted mentor. A light touch on the elbow for encouragement, a reassuring glance when facing the cameras, or stepping back deliberately so Louise could speak with volunteers on her own. All were calculated moves to build confidence in the future successor. However, Louise's rapid rise did not meet with unanimous approval in every corner of the palace. In the shadowed corridors of the royal advisory offices, whispers began to spread like weeds. A few veteran members, staunch traditionalists, expressed concern over entrusting such an important role to a girl not yet 23. They viewed the change as a dangerous haste, a move that could destabilize a structure that had endured for centuries. Despite the conflicting murmurs, Catherine remained steadfast in her instincts. During a closed meeting with her most trusted advisors, those responsible for shaping the image of William's future reign, she made a weighty declaration. Without grand rhetoric, Catherine simply placed her hand on the long-term strategy outline, her eyes shining as she spoke Louise's name. She openly called Louise her future right hand, a position based not only on bloodline, but on absolute trust and proven ability. That statement became a significant milestone, officially sealing Louise's place in the new power structure. For her part, Louise was beginning to feel the profound shift in her daily life. The peaceful days at university and leisurely horse rides at Windsor were gradually being replaced by packed schedules and overwhelming pressure from public expectations. Each time she stepped out of a car, Louise felt the heat of dozens of lenses trained on her. She was learning to control every breath and keep her smile natural, even when tension coiled tightly inside her. A sense of responsibility began to weigh heavily on Louise's slender shoulders. She realized that every step she took was no longer just that of Louise Windsor, the individual, but of a symbol for the modernization of the monarchy. In the rare quiet moments of the evening, as she sat at her dressing table, Louise would often look into the mirror and wonder if she was strong enough to walk this path to the end. Yet the image of Catherine's resilience and the words from her late grandmother's letter would return, giving her fresh strength. Louise knew the door to her quiet life had closed forever behind her. A new chapter, stormy yet brilliantly radiant, was opening where she would no longer be a silent rose, but the one sailing alongside Catherine, steering the Windsor ship toward the dawn of a new generation. The constant clicking of cameras from the press area created a relentless rhythm, signaling that this was far more than an ordinary charity event. Princess Catherine stepped onto the podium in an elegant yet understated outfit, her presence always carrying a quiet authority. Today, however, the media's attention was not focused solely on her, but also on Lady Louise Windsor, who sat in the front row with her hands lightly clasped, exuding calm composure. As Catherine began her speech, her voice resonated throughout the hall. It was more than a routine call for donations. It was a powerful message about continuity. Every gesture, the gentle tilt of her head, the steady gaze directed straight at the cameras, radiated absolute confidence. Catherine skillfully wove Louise into the narrative of the monarchy's future. She described Louise as the embodiment of maturity and responsibility that the younger generation needed. The emotional peak came when Catherine publicly called Louise her future right hand, a phrase spoken with sincerity, yet carrying the weight of a political declaration. In the audience, Louise felt a surge of heat run down her spine. She did not avoid the probing stares, nor did she show any sign of discomfort. Instead, she lifted her head slightly, a soft, restrained smile appearing on her lips, a response that conveyed gratitude while maintaining the necessary royal distance. She understood that from this moment on, her anonymity had ended completely. She was no longer the quiet granddaughter, but had officially become a central figure in the Windsor family's survival strategy. Meanwhile, at Buckingham Palace, Queen Camilla was watching the event live on screen with a heavy heart. Every word of praise Catherine directed at Louise felt like a cut to her pride. Camilla monitored the frenzied public reaction on social media and news websites as sensational headlines began to appear hailing the new power duo of the royal family. Her anger was not merely personal jealousy, but a deep bitterness at seeing her own marginalization being carried out so publicly and elegantly. She saw in Louise's eyes the inheritance of the late Queen Elizabeth II, a quality that, despite years of effort, Camilla had always felt placed her on the outside. The event concluded, but its aftershocks were only just beginning. Images of Catherine and Louise standing side by side, smiling and chatting intimately, instantly became the new symbol splashed across every front page, from the Times to the Daily Mail. Body language experts began dissecting every glance and step between the two women, declaring it a perfect preparation for the day William and Catherine would ascend the throne. The harmonious blend of Catherine's radiance and Louise's serenity created an ideal portrait of a modern monarchy, one that honored tradition while connecting with the new generation. Camilla turned off the screen, leaving the room in a terrifying silence. She felt isolation closing in around her. The advisors who once frequented her office now seemed perpetually occupied with new plans revolving around Catherine and Louise. Every step forward taken by the young woman was one step deeper into the shadows of history for her. In the dim light of the palace, Camilla began to realize that this battlefield no longer had room for old tricks. The future had chosen its people, and she was not among them. Behind the red velvet curtains and gilded doors of the palace, an invisible yet profound rift began to spread through the corridors of power. There were no raised voices or public arguments. This battle was waged through sharp glances, sudden changes in schedules, and secret midnight meetings. The royal household was now clearly divided into two camps. One side consisted of Camilla's old loyalists, those who had stood by her since her days as Duchess of Cornwall, fighting to preserve the old order. The other was made up of younger minds who fully supported William and Catherine's radical reform. Camilla could feel the chill slowly invading her position. During breakfasts and family council meetings, she noticed King Charles III's gaze often sliding past her to linger on plans concerning Louise's future. Whenever she offered advice or opinions on diplomatic protocol, she was met with polite but indifferent nods. Isolation began to gnaw at the mind of a woman who had once prided herself on her resilience. She realized that in this game, the king no longer saw her as a strategic ally, but as a part of the past that needed to be carefully packaged to make way for new faces. Camilla's resistance now carried a note of desperation. She began interfering in minor internal matters, deliberately altering guest lists for private dinners, or demanding changes to internal briefing priorities to assert her presence. Yet every effort met with Catherine's elegantly ruthless silence. The Princess of Wales did not respond with hostility. She countered with a refined cruelty, continuing to push forward joint projects with Louise, as if Camilla's actions were nothing more than small ripples on a lake. Amid the thick tension, Sophie, the Duchess of Edinburgh and Louise's mother, made a notable move. During a walk in the Windsor Gardens, Sophie held a private conversation with trusted members of the Royal Council. With calm but firm composure, she declared that her daughter harbored no ambition for power, nor any plot to undermine anyone. Though spoken gently, Sophie's words carried sharp impact against Camilla's camp. She emphasized that Louise was simply fulfilling the late Queen's final wish. This inadvertently cast Camilla in the role of someone opposing the will of a national icon. Sophie's intervention served as a perfect shield for Louise, rendering all of the Queen's attempts to discredit or obstruct her utterly ineffective. Camilla sat in the reading room, idly turning a cup of cold tea in her hands, and looked out the window to see Louise and Catherine strolling together across the lush green lawn. The sight of two women from different generations, full of energy and enjoying the king's full support, brought Camilla a harsh truth. Her power was not being violently stolen. It was quietly melting away under the heat of change. She realized she was gradually becoming a ceremonial figure rather than one who held real authority. Important invitation letters and key personnel decisions in the palace were now being routed directly through Catherine's office without consulting her. This deliberate disregard hurt more than any argument ever could. Camilla looked down at her hands, the marks of time seeming deeper in the fading afternoon light, and for the first time, she truly felt the exhaustion of a war whose outcome had been decided long ago. Camilla slowly walked to her desk and closed her personal diary. She understood that her influence within the British royal family was entering its final chapters. Outside, the bells of Big Ben rang out, signaling an irreversible transformation in the House of Windsor in which the younger generation was ready to take its place, embraced by public admiration and the consent of history. The brilliant summer light of June poured over the palace grounds, marking an irreversible milestone in the history of the House of Windsor. Lady Louise Windsor stood before the large mirror in the dressing room, her hands gently smoothing the royal blue silk dress, a color traditionally chosen by core members of the family to signify trustworthiness. At 22, her demeanor no longer held the hesitation of a young girl. Instead, it radiated a striking composure, a presence forged through months standing at the center of silent storms. Public affection for Louise had surpassed even the expectations of the most seasoned media advisors. Every gesture, from her solemn bow at memorials to the radiant smile she shared with young people, was embraced by the British public like a refreshing breeze. They saw in her the perfect bridge between modern simplicity and the grace of a bygone golden age. Louise did not seek to overshadow others. It was her humility and quiet dedication that elevated her status, turning her into a symbol of stability amid political turbulence. Princess Catherine watched Louise from afar with open pride. She continued to give Louise opportunities to take center stage at high-profile events where the young royal no longer simply followed in support, but began performing important duties independently. Catherine understood that the transition was not only about power, but also about image. The sight of Catherine and Louise walking side by side along the red carpet, sharing wordless moments of conversation, sent a powerful message to the world. The British royal family was ready for a sustainable future, bound by the strongest tie of generational unity. Yet amid the cheers, debates continued to swirl. Major newspapers repeatedly questioned whether this was the beginning of radical reform, one that would completely replace the old values of Queen Camilla's generation. The modernization, represented by Catherine and Louise, went beyond clothing and communication style. It marked a shift in royal governance, more transparent, more approachable, and focused on genuine values. In the final moments of the reign commemorative event, an unexpected detail was revealed that sent shockwaves through royal observers. Another handwritten note from the late Queen Elizabeth II, preserved in the secret archives, was officially added to the official chronology. The words emphasized a clear philosophy. The future of the throne does not lie in preserving stone walls, but in the hearts of the young people who will inherit it. The release of this note, at the very moment Louise was shining so brightly, served as a belated yet immensely powerful blessing, silencing all remaining doubts about her position. Queen Camilla sat silently in the shadowed corner of the royal box, her eyes fixed on the enlarged note displayed on the large screen. She understood that this was the final full stop on her last efforts to hold on to the old ways. There was no longer anger or resistance, only a vast, deep sadness, as she realized the wheel of history had rolled past her position and moved on to a new chapter. She watched William and Catherine, standing beside Louise, forming a solid triangle of power, a new generation glowing beneath the sun. As the ceremony ended, the solemn bells of Westminster Abbey rang out, spreading across London. Louise stepped onto the palace balcony with the key members of the family, looking down at the sea of people waving vibrant flags and flowers. She took a deep breath, tasting the salt in the wind and feeling the weight of responsibility on her shoulders. Yet her heart no longer held fear. The British royal family had entered a historic period of transformation. In the brilliant light of this new dawn, Catherine and Louise were no longer merely royals. They had become living symbols of the enduring Windsor dynasty. A radiant future was unfolding, one where traditional values were illuminated by the spirit of the modern age, and where the new generation stood ready to write the next glorious chapters of history with unwavering faith and tireless devotion. After finishing the story, in your opinion, was King Charles III's resolute decision to prioritize the late Queen's final wish and elevate the younger generation a wise move to protect the monarchy? Or was it excessively cold toward Queen Camilla? Share your thoughts with us in the comments section. Remember to like, share, and subscribe for more. Also, click the next video showing on your screen. You will enjoy it.